Amen. There's something incredibly beautiful about new life, isn't there? And as we've celebrated Emery's young life today, as Jamie Lee and Dean have presented her for dedication to the Lord, it is natural then for us to spend some time chatting about the very one who knit Emery together in her mother's womb. The very one who did the same for you and for me. Spend a little bit of time this morning exploring together the love that God has for each one of us who are gathered here today. Regardless of what state life might find you in at the moment, regardless of how good or how bad your week's been and how good or how bad you've been, regardless of how many mistakes you've made today, which is probably a good thing given me and all the mistakes that I've made already during this service. But the gospel, literally translated as good news, the gospel is that there's nothing you can do that will make God love you more than he already does. And similarly, there's nothing you can do that will make him love you less. And that his arms remain wide open to anyone who would turn away from their own way and give their lives to him, the giver of life and life in all of its fullness. Here at Megain, we are starting a new series today called Blessed, and it should appear, it's up there on the screen, where we're going to be looking and spending the next weeks between now and Easter Sunday looking at statements which Jesus, God's Son, God in human form, made whilst teaching people on a mountainside. The statements we're going to be looking at form the first portion of what is famously known as the Sermon on the Mount, and are known by the names the Beatitudes, as Gillian said to us, which is a fancy term for the blessings. The blessings, but can also be understood as giving those who follow Jesus their Beatitudes, showing them once again the way in which they are to conduct themselves, or for the sake of ease, the way in which their attitudes are supposed to be. So these are not merely suggestions, but are character traits which every Christian should desire to learn to exhibit and bear in their lives. And when we do, we truly experience the blessing of God in our lives. But what does that look like? What does that look like? And what does Jesus actually say about all of this? Well, Gillian read the passage for us from Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 to 12, a little bit ago there. And today we're not even going to try and attempt to cover the whole thing, because I don't know about you, but there's definitely a fine line between a long sermon and a hostage situation. And I don't want to keep anybody hostage this morning, and I don't even want to tread close to that line, because I know that we have celebrations planned for afterwards as well. But it is very important to consider what Jesus, the giver of life, has to say. And in verse 3, he says this. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." What we're going to do this morning is this. If you're anything like me, you maybe need things broken down a little bit for you into manageable chunks. Since we had kids ourselves, we have learned that you need to cut things up for it to be manageable for the children to eat. And my brain, as you've discovered this morning, isn't that big, and it's not able to hold that much information. And sometimes we need to just break things down so that we can understand it a little bit better. So we're going to break this short verse into 3 manageable chunks. And we're going to see what Jesus actually meant whenever he said this. So does that sound like something we can do? Sound like a plan? Yep, Jamie Lee's up for it. And that's the main thing. So that's super. So the first thing is blessed. First thing Jesus says, blessed. Who here would consider themselves to be blessed? A very quick show of hands. Who would consider themselves to be blessed? We've quite a few hands in the air, which is good. But if you've ever spent any sort of time on social media, on Facebook or Instagram or even on TikTok, you'll have no doubt come across a picture of someone's boyfriend or girlfriend, husband, wife, their son, their daughter, and then the caption contains somewhere within it, #blessed. Hashtag blessed. Has anybody here been guilty of doing that themselves? Hashtag blessed, just me? See, I promised myself I would not be that kind of father, but I am now 3 kids deep, and there's no going back. Everything's hashtag blessed these days. Or maybe somebody has done something nice for you. Maybe they bought you flowers, or they've helped you out when you really needed it. Or someone has done something really nice for you without seeking anything in return. And they've done it just because they could, and just because they wanted to. I reckon at some stage in each of our lives, each one of us have considered ourselves to be blessed. We might not have used the word blessed. We might not have put a hashtag about it on Facebook or Instagram. But at some stage in our lives, each one of us has probably had a moment where we've taken a step back and we've considered ourselves to be blessed. And this has largely been down to an emotion that we perhaps felt in that moment, or how we see ourselves at that particular moment. Yet when Jesus used the word blessed here, it wasn't the kind of hashtag blessed that's focused around emotion in a particular moment, but rather he is describing a kind of joy that all the rubbish of life cannot steal or take away. Have you ever met somebody who is like a Hoover, and they just suck up joy everywhere they go, right? You ever met somebody who's like that? And similarly, have you ever met somebody who's like, it's nice and hot in here, isn't it? Have you ever met somebody who's like a radiator, and they just radiate joy anywhere they go, and you feel good when you're around them and you want to be around them? No matter what Jesus is describing here is the kind of joy that cannot be stolen away by anything that happens or anybody who tries to suck that joy away. So even when life's hard, even when things aren't going our way, when the very opposite of what we feel is blessed, we recognize that even in that moment, we are still blessed. William Barclay, who was a guy who wrote a load of commentaries on the different books of the Bible, he put it this way, and he described it this way. Makarios, which is the word used for blessed, then describes a joy that has its secret within itself. That joy which is serene and untouchable and self-contained. That joy which is completely independent of all the chances and changes of life. So that begs the question for us this morning, how is that even possible? Surely our moods are naturally guided by what's going on around us, right? If you've ever had a terrible day at work, you're hardly going to skip your way back to the car, are you? And if you've had a brilliant news, you're not going to be grumpy about it, are you? So how can joy be completely independent of all the chances and changes of life? Later in the same book, in Matthew chapter 25 and verse 34, Jesus says that on the day of judgment, that is when he comes again, he would say to his people, "Come, you blessed, to my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you at the foundation of the world." On that day, Jesus will judge between those who are blessed and those who are cursed. And Jesus here in Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon of the Mount, both knows and explains the requirements of the blessed one. Here's a wee bit of trivia for you. I didn't know this until I studied it, and I doubt that there'll be many in the room who do know this. But did you know that the last word in the Old Testament scriptures is curse? Yet here, the first word of the opening sermon of Jesus' ministry in the New Testament starts with the opposite. It starts with blessed. And this blessing is used in what's called the present continuous tense, and that's a fancy way of saying that it's here and it's here to stay. It's not going to stop. It's not just something that's going to happen, it's something to be enjoyed and delighted in the here and now. It's not blessed you will be, but rather blessed you are. Blessed is. So I wonder this morning, do you experience this untouchable, and unshakable joy in your life? And if you don't, do you want it? Because Jesus goes on and explains how each one of us can experience it. Because the second third is this: blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, to be poor in spirit doesn't mean that you're skint all the time. Who's longing for payday, right? It doesn't mean that you're skint all the time, but it does mean, and it does not mean, rather, that you have a terribly low opinion of yourself, or that you think the world would be a better place if you weren't a part of it. Having money is not a bad thing. Those with low opinions of themselves often don't realise just how loved they are by so many people. And the world is a better place because you are a part of it. Each one of us here are fearfully and wonderfully made by God in His image, on purpose and for a purpose. And I'm so glad that you're here this morning, and so is He. Rather, to be poor in spirit is to recognise that God is God and we are not. It is to come to the realization that there is more to life than what we are already experiencing. And no matter how much we try and fill it with other stuff, it is only God who can satisfy the deepest desires of our being. To be poor in spirit simply means to recognize that we need God and that without Him we lack something. Now, this being poor in spirit can't be artificially produced. You don't just suddenly wake up one day and decide you're going to hate yourself and everything about you. It cannot be artificially produced through tearing ourselves down and beating ourselves up or beating others up at every opportunity. But rather, this realization can only be brought about by God's Holy Spirit speaking into our lives and working in our hearts. I'm willing to stick my neck out this morning and say that not one of us is humble enough to recognise in our own strength and in our own resolve that there's something about us that is lacking. Nobody likes to admit that they need help, do they? I don't like to admit that I need help. I've told the congregation here before, if you give me the user manual with an IKEA flat pack, I will chuck that user manual away. And I will still be there hours later because I'm a man and I will do this and I will do it right. And then when it's finally done, there's a couple of screws still not part of the thing. And my desk in my office, I built it. And I'm all delighted and it looks great, but what people don't know, because they don't sit at my desk, is that the drawers don't come out. Right? The drawers don't come out. And my wife knows that and she's laughing because she offered to help and I said no. But not one of us is willing to admit that we need help. Not one of us in our own strength, and it almost seems unnatural to say that we lack something. Human nature dictates that we will fight against any such notion, that we will plant our feet firmly in the ground and we will not be moved, right? And we're not at a Rangers game singing that, right? But we're British, aren't we? We're British, for goodness sake. We'll make fun of ourselves in the name of a few good laughs, but if anyone else were to make those jokes or point out those things about us, we'd most definitely push back. And we go, how dare you? Who do you think you are? You ever said that to somebody? It's really satisfying, isn't it? It's really satisfying. But we get defensive and we put that person in their place, often with a few home truths about them that they've clearly overlooked in themselves. It's natural for us to bite back and to fight back against this notion that we need help, that we are lacking. But when the Spirit of God moves, when He gently woos us and calls us to Himself, whenever He convicts us of our sinful living, of the things which separate us from relationship with God, that's a little bit different, isn't it? When conviction comes, it is easier for us to recognize that need for God in our lives. Charles Spurgeon, who was a much better preacher than me, described it this way. He says, "It's not what I have, but what I have not, that is the first point of contact between my soul and God." Not what I have, but what I have not is the first point of contact between my soul and God. And Jesus states this beatitude first, because it's where we start with God. He didn't start with blessed are the pure, or blessed are the holy, or blessed are the spiritual, or blessed are the wonderful. He didn't start with blessed is the one who has their life together and all figured out. No. Jesus started with blessed are the poor in spirit. He started with blessed are those who recognize their need for help. Blessed are those who recognize their need for God. Then lastly, you'll be glad to know I'm nearly done. But lastly, he then goes on and finishes this beatitude. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." You see, when we come to a place where we are poor in spirit, this demands some sort of response. This very same Jesus who lays out these truths is the very same Jesus who would lay down his life as a ransom for you and for me on the cross, taking upon himself the sins of the world, past, present, and future. My sins and your sins were nailed to the cross with him, to which he freely went and laid down his life, taking our place, that we might one day have the opportunity of knowing the joy of sins forgiven, and life abundant, and life forevermore with him. And those who are poor in spirit, those who turn from their sin and turn to him and seek the forgiveness of sins, we're told that the poor in spirit are rewarded. They receive a prize. They receive a reward. They receive the kingdom of heaven. They receive life everlasting with him. They receive life, and life in all of its fullness, right here, right now. Those who are spiritually lacking become those who are spiritually rich. But as long as we harbour illusions about our own spiritual resources, we will never receive from God what we need to be saved. This morning, Jamie Lee and Dean have dedicated beautiful Emery to the Lord. And I wonder today, in closing, might we recognise that we are poor in spirit, that we are the poor in spirit of whom Jesus speaks. And just as Emery's life was dedicated to the Lord, might we too dedicate our lives to him today. For in him is found fullness of life and the kingdom of heaven. I'm going to invite the band to come, and we're going to sing a song in closing. And during this song, we're going to do two things. Jamie Lee and Dean actually requested that we collect an offering today, and no minister is going to say no to that. So we're going to collect our offering as part of our singing of the next song. If you haven't come prepared, please let the basket pass you by without any sense of embarrassment. But also, what we're going to do is we're going to take the opportunity to respond, and maybe something of what has been said here, something of what has happened in this place this morning has resonated with you, and maybe you want to respond to that. You can do that where you're seated and simply ask and open yourself up to God, that he may come in and rule and reign. But if you're able, let's stand as we sing together. Christ is enough.